All right, so today we have Deborah Grant and Heather Carpenter who are presenting. So I'll give the floor to you and you can, do your introductions.
Great, thanks very much. So my name's Deborah Grant, and I'm an advocate with Disability Rights of West Virginia.
My name is Heather Carpenter. I'm a current MSW student at the WVU School of Social Work.
And Heather was a MSW intern at Disability Rights of West Virginia last year. You haven't had MSW intern for field placement. It is a wonderful thing to do. I highly recommend it. We had a really great time last year, I think.
We did.
Um, Also want to let you know that my counterpart in the southern part of the state, Kevin White, also worked on this presentation. So I want to be sure to give him credit for that. And then just getting started, can we have folks like drop in the chat, like what your role is? Maybe are you from another advocacy group? Do you work for DCR? Do you work for DOHS? Are you a clinician? Something else that I'm not thinking of, if you have lived experience, if folks wouldn't mind putting some of that stuff in the chat just so we can kind of get an idea of who all we are. And I don't know how to find the chat from where I am. So,
At the bottom, there is a chat button, but I can read out
oh,
loud.
there it is. Okay.
Okay, or you can go ahead and look.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we got the department, some folks at the VA, awesome. Wheeling Hospital, department, Presley Ridge, Aetna, very cool. All skilled nursing, yep. This is great. There's all kinds of folks on here from different places, and I love that. Thanks, guys. Okay, so let's get started. So we're going to start with our learning objectives. Um, what we're hoping that you'll be able to do at the end of this presentation is describe generally what disability rights does with respect to justice-involved individuals and other people. Explain the sequential intercept model. Discuss strengths and areas for growth for reentry or discharge from carceral settings in West Virginia, and then engage in action to promote positive change. Wanna just a quick note, we're kind of touching the highlights of a couple of different topics, each of which could definitely be their own hour, probably longer. And we're really focusing mostly on adults with disabilities such as IDD, mental illness, traumatic brain injury, or older folks with either mobility issues or cognitive disabilities. Not so much with kids and not so much with substance use disorder, just to narrow our scope a little bit. Not that those things aren't important, because they really, really are important. So, who are we? We are the federally mandated protection and advocacy organization for the state of West Virginia. So, starting in the 1970s, US Congress has passed different pieces of legislation that says every state has to have a protection and advocacy organization to make sure that people with disabilities' rights are respected and protected. And we're it for West Virginia. Um, we are a private nonprofit. Our main office is in Cross Lanes and the local office is in Bridgeport. And that's the office I work out of. So what do? We do a lot of different things related to serving people with disabilities. We provide information and referral to just about anyone who calls in and is going to get mail from us with something. We provide individual advocacy on specific issues that a person's experiencing. We train professionals and natural supports to help support an individual with a disability to advocate for themselves. And we promote self-advocacy, education, and encourage folks to do what they can do for themselves. We also engage in systemic advocacy and litigation and legal representation. Um, a lot of what we do, a lot of what I do is what we call monitoring. We monitor, which means going and looking at places. We monitor pretty much any place a person with a disability might live, work, learn, play, or vote. We have pretty broad access authority when we go to a place that we're allowed to talk to pretty much anybody we want to. We have some amount of latitude at looking at records. And then we also investigate abuse and neglect in a variety of settings. And the cool thing about that is we get to decide what is a potential or alleged abuse and neglect. We don't have to wait for some other agency to say, you should look at this.
All right, so getting into DRWV's grants and all that fun stuff. So they have 9 federal grants and 1 state grant. The first 4 grants are disability driven, which means they're acting on the behalf of individuals with disabilities, and that can include a variety of issues like home and community-based services, abuse and neglect, investigations, housing discrimination, other rights restrictions, and stuff like that. So first we have PAD, which is, well, I'll just preface by saying all of them, P and A is protection and advocacy. So PAD, protection and advocacy for individuals with developmental disabilities. And then we have PAMI, which is protection and advocacy for individuals with mental illness. And that is the grant that Deb and Kevin work under. They got the northern part of the state and the southern part of the state split up. And then, so that also is a large umbrella and allows them to help more individuals. Sorry, I still say us because I used to intern with them, but they made me feel like one of the team. So, and then we have Pat B. So that is including for individuals with a traumatic brain injury. And then we have PAIR, which is protection and advocacy under individual rights. This includes people who are not able to be served by the other 3. And the only limitation of that one is the program under which we serve many older West Virginians. There's not really anything that they can do a lot with all of this and serve a lot of people. And that brings us to the 5 issue driven programs, all federal. And these programs are based on an issue. So unlike the ones based on disability driven programs, these are based on an issue. So assistive technology, voting access. We have PAT, protection and advocacy for assistive technology. We have CAP, client assistance, PAVA, protection advocacy for helping people with disabilities vote, PABS, and PAT, PAT RP, PAB RP. So they both work closely with West Virginia Division of Rehabilitation Services, which is required by the federal government. And then that last one there, representative payees, we call that the secret squirrel because it's a very secretive. Most of the staff, except for the one person who works under that grant, can really know anything about that. So it is highly confidential.
Great. Okay, so we have one state grant program. That's the Medley-Hartley Advocacy Program. Medley and Hartley were both class action suits. It was Medley versus Ginsburg and EH versus Mateen, and both of those had outcomes that resulted in certain things in place to try to keep people with intellectual developmental disabilities out of institutions. And so Medley-Hartley Advocacy Program is our largest program. We have 6 advocates who are solely Medley advocates, and then we have 4 other folks who are covering. So like I'm a PAMI advocate through a federal grant, but I am currently covering 8 Medley class members advocacy. And as of October 24th, we had 275 Medley class members. To be a Medley class member, a person has to be a resident of West Virginia. They have to have an intellectual developmental disability. They have to have been hospitalized in a state psych hospital for more than 30 days before they turn 23. And then this is kind of a carryover from the original. They have to be born after like some random date, like April 15th, 1959, or something that doesn't really matter anymore. Most of our new Medley class members tend to be kids who have aged out of care and there's not a good place for them to go be, and then they end up in a state hospital, and then once they reach their 30 days, then they can become a Medley class member. So before we go on, questions so far about disability rights or anything we've said so far? I know it's we're throwing a lot of information at you today. Okay, hearing nothing. So one of the things when we started looking at this that I probably don't even think I realized was the extent to which people with disabilities are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. And there's lots of different reasons for that. Sometimes it's a co-occurring mental health and other disability, mental health and substance use, mental health and IDD. Sometimes severe or difficult behaviors that just go with the disability, that over time they don't, the public sometimes doesn't know what's going on, or law enforcement sometimes doesn't know what's going on with the person, or sometimes a kid has grown up and they've just gotten too big that the family can't physically handle them anymore. And so there's a lot of those kind of difficult behaviors that are really part of the disability. However, they end up being criminal justice issues. And another one is like some folks compulsively call 911, and that's, not much appreciated by the 911 folks. I had another fella, he got arrested because he had lived with his family for a long time. They had passed. He was himself getting older. He had some cognitive issues and mental illness. He would not leave. I can't remember what the location was, but he would not leave there because he wanted something to eat, but he wouldn't leave. And so he eventually got arrested for trespassing. But the long and short of it was he was just there because he wanted something to eat. He really loved peanut butter sandwiches. Okay, a lot of folks are incompetent to understand that they even committed a crime. Again, kind of the IDD population may not even realize that the thing that they did was illegal or anything like that. And the school also, in addition to like families, people outstripping the resources that families have, a lot of schools and other community services just don't have the bandwidth to handle everything that's going on with some folks. And that includes eligibility for services and the availability of community-based services. And a lot of that has to do with staff. You guys probably know that. So just some more information. 50% of women in state prisons have a disability, 40% of everyone in state prisons has a disability. I'm not super hot at math, but I think that probably means 30% of men do have a disability. Folks with a disability are more likely to have previously resided in other types of institutions, be it juvenile detention, a different psych hospital, some other thing to that effect. A quarter of people with a mental illness have been arrested in their lifetime. Some of the core features of autism spectrum disorder, especially those social behavioral delays and the communication delays, the restrictive and repetitive behaviors, and the sensory issues, can really place a person with autism at risk for involvement in the criminal justice system, but it also increases the risk of them experiencing more trauma in the criminal justice system. Like, they're not doing what the CO asks just to be difficult. It's a behavioral thing. It's a sensory thing. They're not, but then they still might get the pepper spray. And so one thing that's been really helpful with that in West Virginia is the Training Academy and Institute. They've definitely, I know that they've added some more trauma-informed stuff, and that they've added a autism-specific module to that. Okay, so talking some more just about West Virginia specifically, when we go and monitor at a DCR facility, we don't monitor at the federal facilities, just the state, so the regional jails and the state prisons. We're kind of looking, we like to talk to different people in the facility. We like to talk to the Wexford folks. We like to talk to the SciMed folks. We like to talk to the DCR folks. We like to talk to some of the residents or inmates at the facility and kind of see what goes on, what's working well, what's not working well, if there's any bugs in the system and things like that. And so most of the monitoring takes place under PAD PAMI, PADB pair. But then we also do intakes with residents as needed, sometimes for assisted technology. And for the folks who are eligible to vote, sometimes to do a voting access, or maybe it's about medical services. And that again would be the issues driven. And so in talking to employees at the different agencies that work inside DCR facilities, it's not uncommon for people to end up in jail who really there's no reason for them to be there. These are not criminal masterminds. These are folks whose needs are not being met in the community, and there is no less restrictive environment to handle them. There's always a bed in jail. There may not be a bed in a group home. There may not be a bed in a crisis center, but there's always a bed in jail. Also, sometimes folks who may be in a nursing home and they might be having cognitive disabilities that are becoming more pronounced, and they may not be able to be maintained in that setting. So just to give you guys some numbers, in fiscal year 24, we worked with people in carceral settings on 5 allegations of abuse, 15 requests for assistive technology, 9 requests for assistance with home and community-based services, 76 allegations of neglect, and 23 allegations of rights violations. And I wanted to add, and some folks may already be aware of this, there was research done by Reuters, collected the data, and then the ACLU did the report that from 2009 to 2019, West Virginia had the most deadly jails in the nation. Our death rate was 2.87 times higher than the US average in the jail setting, and a lot of these were due to suicide, homicide, or drug and alcohol overdoses. Most of those happen within like the first 30 days of being admitted. So, good stuff.
So, we mentioned a lot of the stuff that, is concerning and lacking within the system, but don't worry, we're here to tell you that there may be a solution. So, a lot of other states have looked into this as well as West Virginia. So, we have the Sequential Intercept Model. Can you guys just drop in the chat or do like the little hand thing if anyone's heard of it? No? Okay. Okay. Good. We're going to tell you guys about it. So the sequential intercept model is a framework that was developed to identify time points where a justice-involved individual with a mental health or substance use disorder can be diverted out of the criminal justice system. The mapping process brings together leaders of different agencies and systems to work together to identify strategies to divert people with mental and substance use disorders away from the criminal justice system. Okay, so here we have a nice little graphic, and it explains kind of a little bit about what each intercept is all about. So it originally started with intercepts 1 through 5, and intercept 0 was later added on, really to focus in on that prevention aspect rather than waiting until after someone comes into contact with law enforcement. So there are 6 intercepts overall. So looking at intercept 0, we have community services. And like I just said, that's more so that preventative aspect. So that's like crisis lines and stuff like that. And then we have intercept 1, which also kind of ties into crisis with 911 and local law enforcement. And intercept 3, or 2, I'm sorry, 2. We're looking at initial detention, which could also divert into intercept 3, which is specialty courts, which can look like mental health courts or drug courts, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. But also in that intercept 3 is traditional punishment, such as jail. And then intercept 4, you're looking at re-entry into the community, which is a major thing that disability rights dealt with, was trying to help find places for people to go after they were released from prison, because releasing them into that same environment that they got in trouble in isn't really a good option for them. So really trying to find good places in the community for people to go is really hard. And then intercept 5 is looking at community correction. So that is things like probation and parole, like what's happening after they are getting back into the community, getting settled in, are they on probation or parole? And then another thing about the sequential intercept model, it was recognized in the 21st Century Cures Act as a means for promoting community-based strategies to improve public health and public safety outcomes for justice-involved people with mental and substance use disorders. So, looking a little bit about what the research is saying, I personally did a lot of research on this when I was with disability rights, so I find it really interesting, and I've seen a lot of research saying about the effectiveness, and it seems to do really well for people. So, counties who made pre-booking improvements at intercepts 0 and 1, so that's that prevention, crisis lines, that type of stuff. Booked fewer people with severe mental illness. This is due to changes made in the preventative and community services to prevent that. And then crisis interventions teams, CIT, have been employed with increasing frequency at law enforcement agencies. So this model has been shown to reduce injuries to civilians and decrease use of force by officers. And that is an important one too, because oftentimes, like Deb had mentioned, like individuals with autism sometimes have those sensory issues. So like an officer touching them, they might resist, well, they're not trying to resist, but in the officer's eyes, they're resisting or they're fighting back. And, then they're just going to probably further get injured or injure the officer, which is not good for anybody. So, reducing those injuries is really important. And that takes an understanding of working with individuals with special needs. So, we also have an increased transport to crisis services, improved collaboration across systems, and another way to reduce incarceration at the front end is by linking individuals with the services that they need instead of taking people to jail. Training officers has also been beneficial in preventing these criminal justice interactions with individuals with autism. Thinking about their behavior and communication characteristics often go with autism and how law enforcement, that's kind of just what I explained, that law enforcement might interpret them in the wrong way if they don't fully understand autism, and that could really impact that individual negatively. And the research also suggests that participation in treatment services, psychiatric care, mental health courts, along with training for probation and parole officers can help reduce recidivism. So now we have a couple real life examples where the sequential intercept model was applied. So in Pennsylvania, Bucks County, they had a year-long effort in Bucks County where staff organized an effort to improve the local continuum of interactions and services of the mental health and criminal justice system. And in Philadelphia County, they started a forensic task force that also used the sequential intercept model as an organizing and planning framework. The model is also being used in a cross-training curriculum for community change, and it's to improve services for people with co-occurring disorders in the criminal justice system. So this will be able to hopefully increase the number of people with mental illness or substance use or co-occurring disorders, increase the amount of them that are diverted from the criminal justice system, which in turn would lead to hopefully increased connections within the community and behavioral health services, reduce that recidivism rate, and be able to match individuals with appropriate resources based on their specific needs. So then in Wichita, I'm terrible at pronouncing that, I'm sorry, Wichita, Kansas, the police department homeless outreach team known as HOT as part of a continuum of care in the community. In 2011, they made contact with 12,500 people, which is huge. And they placed 932 in housing, shelters, behavioral health, medically assisted treatment, and case management organizations. So the HOT officers are connected to people experiencing homelessness in two ways. They can come in contact with them through 911 calls or direct referrals from the community. The officers respond, they assess the situation, and then they offer their assistance. And then they partner also with numerous behavioral health, and in situations where a person is like violating public ordinance, they could be facing potential charges, and then HOT kind of intervenes and has the ability to drop minor charges if people agree to engage in services. So like an example is someone is causing a public disturbance and one of these officers is called and they're like, hey, if they are presumably on a substance, can we help you go to rehab? Like we're gonna drop this down. It doesn't have to be something that'll really be terrible for you, and hopefully we can get a good outcome for you with this. They also may request that a judge sends a person through mental health court or drug court instead of the criminal justice system, which we love rehabilitation over putting someone in the jail or prison system. And then HOT also conducts education and outreach activities with other agencies and the public to address misinformation and misguided attempts to help people experiencing homelessness, which is really important because they are a very misunderstood population. And then finally, in Oakland County, Michigan, The first priority is keeping people from entering jail to begin with by diverting them to crisis centers. So that is again, that intercepts 0 and 1. That preventative measure is really important. All of the intercepts are important, but that preventative measure, if we intercept there, then hopefully the goal is to not have to do like intercepts 2, 3, 4, 5. And they've done that by expanding the crisis intervention team training for officers and then creating a supported transition into rapid rehousing program for inmates experiencing mental illness and homelessness, and creating a juvenile justice diversion coordinator to identify and divert youth with mental health needs away from the criminal justice system, which is also super important because a lot of these youth they're all going to eventually become adults, and unfortunately, a lot of them are going to face the same problems that they did in their youth and their adulthood, and they're probably going to be more punitive measures in adulthood. So if we can get an early intervention on this, hopefully it can help them. And then for individuals who are incarcerated in Oakland Community Health Network, they speak daily with the inmates who have been referred by medical professionals, connect them to mental health services and other resources. They work to develop a plan before they're released from jail, which is super, super important. Like I said before, in West Virginia, and I'm sure other states, we are struggling to make good plans for people after they get out of jail. And it's not anybody's fault. It's just a lack of resources, really, and collaboration. So this includes using telehealth and connections to providers in the community, and the program is averaging 600 diversions per year. 216 law enforcement officers have been trained in CIT, and 240 first responders have been trained in mental health first aid. After receiving the CIT training, the officers use the mental health training services 38 times more than they did before the training. So continuing on, looking at the sequential intercept model and in relation to West Virginia. So on the left, we kind of have like things that have been going really well. And then on the right, we have things that we might need to work on a little bit. I will say the first two things here on the left are not specifically to do with the sequential intercept model, but the rest of them are. So during 2023 legislation, the Senate passed Bill 232, which added a new section to state code, ordering that there be a multidisciplinary study group to make recommendations regarding the diversion of people with mental illness, developmental disabilities, cognitive disabilities, and all that other stuff we talked about earlier. So we have the first two strengths, like I said, not from the exact report, but they have been making improvements for us. So as many of you may know, DCR was really struggling to not have enough people employed. So since the pay was increased and there has been more people hired, more people can focus on helping plan for reentry and provide services, which has been really helpful. And then Southern Highlands CIT and care programs have been working to improve the understanding and prevent arrests, which is really great. And again, intercept 0 and 1 prevention, really important to hit on. So Western Regional Jail, Prestera, has been working with inmates immediately after release, literally when they walk out of the door to offer services, housing and transportation. Southern Regional Jail has built relationships with substance use disorder treatment programs and recovery services to make a smooth transition for people that need to receive treatment and housing and that type of thing. So looking directly at the Senate Bill 232 report, we can see that West Virginia obviously has a willingness to want to improve, and they've built some capacity through programs like 988, Help for West Virginia, the IDD waiver, which is intellectuals with developmental disabilities, and the CSED waivers, which is for children in emotional disability, children with emotional disabilities. Sorry, I'm bad with all of the abbreviations. So sometimes I need to like write a note off to the side for that. So the REACH initiative and the reentry councils meet regularly to help plan for successful reentry. And then the Dangerousness Assessment Advisory Board, or it goes DAB, they provide recommendations to the court regarding appropriate placement, custody, and supervision of individuals that are deemed dangerous. And their role is to assess the level of risk posed by these individuals and suggest measures to protect the public and the individual themselves. And then ACT is an assertive community treatment program, and it exists basically at all comprehensive behavioral health centers in the state. There's a comp center to serve each one of West Virginia's 55 counties. And both of those kind of go in with Intercept 4. And as you guys can see, most of these have a note underneath of what intercepts they kind of correlate with. So now looking into areas for growth here on the right, definitely a need for increased collaboration among professionals that are dealing with people in the criminal justice system, cooperation, data sharing. I know a lot of us are really busy, but it's important to share and connect about what issues because a lot of people are probably having the same issues that you are. So there's tends to be a disconnect between policy goals and the way that policies are actually implemented. West Virginia needs more home and community-based services. Like I said, we have those really great services like IDD and CSED waiver, but it's just not enough people are willing to do the work that agencies provide given what they pay them, and understandably so. West Virginia really just doesn't have enough licensed therapists, counselors, psychologists, and psychiatrists to see everyone who needs to be seen, and we don't have enough services and supports to serve everyone that needs help. So when this report was written, the Senate Bill 232, there were 12 crisis beds in the state for individuals with IDD. And you're probably thinking, oh, well, that's not very many, but now there are 0. So that was better than the 0 that we have now. So just keeping that in mind. We also have issues with transportation and workforce issues, yeah, which the pay has a lot to do with that. We also don't utilize the Division of Rehabilitation Services, assertive community treatment, and community engagement services when individuals leave carceral settings, and again, workforce funding type of issues. DCR has gone to order out a selection, which means funding was cut and fewer people can be served, unfortunately. Finally, we get into housing, and housing has generally been an issue for a while. There's just not enough beds, there's not enough openings, there isn't enough safe and affordable housing for people that can live independently. The people that would benefit from traditional or supportive housing, the problem is even worse for them. Taking mental health group homes into account, these group homes would be great for people with mental illness, but maybe not IDD or not substance use disorder. We need more specific places for people to go. And there are somewhere between about 50 to 70 mental health group home beds in the entire state, not counting forensic group homes or psychiatric step-down units. And there's just so many that would do great as a mental health group home and possibly could transition people to a lower level of care down the road, but there's just not enough at this point in time. West Virginia has a serious need for transitional housing, supportive housing, and permanent supportive housing for individuals who need a less restrictive environment generally.
Okay, so we're going to move into some reentry stuff, but before we do that, do we have any questions about sequential intercept model or anything that we've talked about so far? Oh, Dr. Gandy has a question.
Yeah, this is really great information. I'm really excited to hear about this intercept model. And maybe you mentioned it and I missed it, but is there a specific person or people that are designated to do this model in West Virginia? Or is it like everybody does it, or people should do it, or like, yeah, I know you started your presentation talking about like, here's our grant and here's who does it. Does that apply to this?
So so the report was done by specific people. But all of those home and community-based services, like all of those different steps of the intercepts are all kinds of different folks all around the state.
Right. I just wasn't sure if there was like, here's the intercept coordinator, the person who makes sure the intercept model is followed or something.
That would be great. We would
Right.
like that a lot. And so I wasn't involved with this when it was going on. I kind of get the feeling though that like the folks who did that report, and that report's available on the DRWV website. It's really, really interesting if you like that kind of stuff. Like I loved it. It was fascinating. those folks who did that report are still involved in this system and still doing work to try to make things better. But in terms of like a one-stop shop for these things, unfortunately, we don't have a thing like that. All right, thank you for the question. Someone mentioned something that is right on target. Housing is especially challenging for the person if they are a registered sex offender, if they've been found guilty of a sex offense. Yes, absolutely. That is a really, really hard thing. And then if you take that characteristic and put it with maybe a mobility issue, and maybe you put that with maybe lack of funds. I mean, every time you add one of those intersections, it gets worse, right? So, but yes, you're absolutely right on. And that person's name was Arlene Hudson. Thank you. Okay, anything else? Alrighty, so we're going to move in to start talking about reentry planning. This is a similar slide to the last one we looked at, and a lot of it is kind of repetitive, unfortunately, because the things that are not necessarily happening on the sequential intercept model are kind of some of the same barriers that happen in the reentry part of the world. So reentry support is often important in helping individuals when they're leaving a carceral setting. In reentry planning, the idea is that jail and prison staff coordinate with the different services and resources in the community to ensure that individuals are referred to the appropriate programs and services and hopefully don't come back to carceral setting. We want these to be well planned out. We want people to have what they need so that they can avoid future interaction with law enforcement and going back to jail. Two important things in this are peer navigators and yeah. Sorry, I think I lost something. Okay, sorry. So peer support specialists, sorry, they provide recovery-oriented treatment planning and non-clinical services such as housing support, employment services. Patient navigators help individuals leaving jail overcome some of those barriers. And the most successful peer recovery and patient navigation interventions begin pre-release so that the person that they start working with when they're still incarcerated is the same person that they meet up with and continue to work with once they get out. So some evidence-based stuff for supporting reentry. Want to have the trauma-informed programs. We want to have stigma reduction, ongoing monitoring and evaluation of outcomes, beginning the reentry planning as early as possible. And so probably folks are familiar with the idea that discharge planning begins the minute someone gets admitted someplace, and it theoretically should be the same in these types of settings. It really helps to provide individuals with what they call a bridging prescription so that when they get out, they already have their medication. It's one thing they don't have to worry about is where they're going to get the medication that they need to be successful. They also need to have the necessary paperwork and documentation. I'm pretty sure you have to have an ID sometimes to pick up a medication. And you have to have an ID to get a job. You also need another form to get a job. It's usually a social security card. So for people to do all the stuff that they're supposed to have to do to stay out of jail, they need help getting all of the things to be able to do those things. It's also really helpful to provide an in-person connection to reentry services and a warm handoff. It helps to establish connections to a broad range of support services so that the professionals who are in the carceral setting, that they're kind of building up their toolkit of different people who can help out in different ways. And another thing that's important is facilitating reunification with family members when that's appropriate. That really helps people have connection and feel that sense of belonging and have that sense of community that can help them do better. So looking more specifically at how are we doing in West Virginia? So one of the strengths is that we have what's called a Reentry Stakeholders Committee, and it's made up of DOHS, Department of Human Services, DCR, West Virginia Division of Correction and Rehabilitation, Disability Rights of West Virginia, and then SciMed. SciMed's the behavioral health provider in the DCR facilities. We all get together, and other agencies sometimes, we all get together to talk about some of the most challenging individuals. We come together, we brainstorm ideas, and sometimes those are ideas individual to that person, but then sometimes things become apparent to us that maybe this is a systemic thing. Excuse me. And so we also look at those types of how can we kind of make a change that's going to help the system in its entirety. One of the strengths we've already mentioned a little bit is the reentry councils that happen all around the state, increasing peer support programs. And then West Virginia is making progress towards CCBHCs. What the heck is that? Certified Community Behavioral Health Clinics. So the last time we checked, which was October of 2024, 6 out of the 13 existing comprehensive behavioral health centers were certified community behavioral health clinics. And they're similar to what we used to call comp centers, in that they provide mental health, substance abuse disorder, and services for folks with IDD. One of the things that's really cool about this model is there's a lot of stuff that people need help doing, but there's not a way to bill for it. And so people can't continually do the things that they can't bill for to support people the way they need supported. And from what I understand, that there's a way in this system to kind of capture those other little things that people do, that becomes a billable service. And so then more people are able to get more support. So community CCBHCs can reduce the risk of incarceration and recidivism, help improve access to medication-assisted treatment. They can help with diversion. CCBHCs are required to partner with law enforcement and criminal justice agencies. So and one more thing is, at this point, it's often common for a person who's leaving West Virginia DCR to be approved for Medicaid before they walk out the door. Some areas for continued growth, continuity of care and warm handoffs. And so, as I kind of stressed before, that with the peer supports, peer recovery supports, and the peer patient navigators, those that work best are the ones that start before the person leaves, and they have the same person that they're working with when they're on the inside and when they're on the outside. And it's also helpful when it can be that warm handoff. So they go from working with someone that they already know and then meet up with everybody together, and then they go on and work with the new person. It helps to build trust and build a relationship, and just not feel like they just got passed off to someone. A little more care and attention focused on that transition. Again, housing options is really problematic. We kind of already talked about the issues related to people who have been found guilty of sex offenses. And then good old transportation, childcare, and employment issues in West Virginia. I mean, those things are not new to us, but they really are a problem for reentry. Again, a lot of times people have a bunch of rules on them about they're supposed to do this and this and this and this and this. And it's really hard to do some of those things if you don't have a place to put your kids. It's really hard to do some of those things if you don't have a place to get, it's only 10 miles, but the road's like this and it takes 30 minutes to get there. And that's really tough for people in West Virginia. And we know that, we live here. We've all been dealing with it probably our whole lives. Two things that are question marks that aren't actually on this slide that I'm not really sure, I get mixed answers, and maybe you guys even know, is if folks, the thing about getting a government ID, is what we're doing working right now, or is it not working right now? My understanding is that when a person leaves the carceral setting, they get a thing to take to the DMV to use to make the ID or to get the ID. But the paper that they have when they walk out is not an actual ID. They're supposed to be able to use it to do certain things. Not all the places that they're supposed to be able to use it at will let them. So that's kind of a question mark. And if anybody has comments on that, love to hear it. And then another one is access to financial benefits and supports. And so this includes like SSI, SSDI, SNAP. So most folks get pre-approved for Medicaid, but the Medicaid and SNAP applications are the same piece of paper. And so the reentry stakeholders group kind of looked at this is there not a way that we could do some of this paperwork ahead of time so that people can get food the day they leave a carceral setting. Food's important. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Food is important to people. Okay, moving on. Some really key areas to focus on with reentry planning, mental health and substance use disorder and needs related to those things, finding employment opportunities and the places that are willing to work with and are understanding of folks in recovery or folks with mental illness. And again, stable housing is so important. And again, those family connections that employment and family, employment's a lot more than a paycheck. And family is a lot more than a family. It's the sense of belonging. It's the sense of contributing, all of those things that really help build a person up to be successful. So I have the next several slides available as a handout. We're kind of getting close on time, but basically DRWV developed this handout called the Desk Guide for Discharge Planning. And we kind of put do this, do this, do this based on our experience of us working with DCR and working with SciMed, all of us working together to try to work on discharge planning for some folks or reentry planning for some folks. And so that's going to be available to you in terms of what to do first, second, third, and some other just ideas around that. All right.
All right, back to me. So we've just thrown a lot of information about all of this to you guys. Hopefully you're feeling good. We're almost done. So now what? What can we do? Like Dr. Gandy had asked, like while there isn't like a specific person out there coordinating this, we can do things to kind of help, make those connections within the community, with each other, and like take some things away from the sequential intercept model that can directly help us and our clients. So policy advocacy, we can lobby for legislation if we're able to do that. That promotes diversion programs. We can reduce mass incarceration by doing that and support reintegration efforts like housing assistance and job training. We can also advocate for reforms to parole and probation to prioritize rehabilitation over punishment and push for increased funding for mental health and substance abuse programs within correctional facilities. Looking at client-centered practice, utilizing trauma-informed approaches to understand the complex experiences of justice-involved individuals. During my time at Disability Rights, Deb had kind of told me, like, you can kind of go into any, justice involved into an interaction with a justice involved individual, assuming they have experienced some kind of trauma because it is so common with them. So just keeping that in mind and then fostering a collaborative relationship with clients, empowering them to make informed decisions and providing culturally sensitive services that respect their identities and their experiences. Community engagement can look like partnering with community organizations that offer housing, employment, educational opportunities for reintegrating into the community. We can also educate the public about the challenges faced by justice-involved individuals to reduce stigma and promote more of an understanding of what these individuals go through and their unique needs. We can also help organize community events to raise awareness about criminal justice reform issues. And then looking at professional development, seeking ongoing training in areas, which you guys are doing today. That's great for things like criminal justice reform, trauma-informed care, and culturally competent practice. And we can also stay informed about the emerging research and best practices related to working with justice-involved individuals and networking with other people working with similar populations, other social workers, other people specializing in criminal justice to share our knowledge and collaborate on initiatives. Okay, so to wrap up, I just want to give you guys a couple of statistics and facts that should really stick with us. So, not one more person should be imprisoned for being sick. They shouldn't be punished for being sick or having a disability or a mental illness. Family members should not be afraid to call 911 for fear of incarceration, harm, or death to one of their loved ones. And criminal justice lacking basic education on how to help someone with a mental health problem. We just not any more of that either. And then to wrap up with this little fact, a person can actually find a gun easier than they can get an appointment for a mental health treatment, which is absolutely crazy. Welcome to America.
Okay, thanks. All right, guys, do we have any questions or comments? I did see a few things in the chat. So an ICF home is an intermediate care facility for a person with an intellectual or developmental disability. And so I'm not 100% sure what Karen's referring to there. Um, I just don't know, but I would be interested in hearing more if she wants to holler.
What the problem
Thank you.
is when you're in an ICF, you do not receive things like utility bills, which have proof of residency. And we have really had to go through all the red hoops trying to get IDs for our clients. It's really been kind of a nightmare.
Now I understand. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because these folks are probably not going to have any of those things coming to
No.
them.
May I interject?
Sure.
Yeah.
This is Tracy Hall. Karen, I used to supervise the group homes at Prestera, and DMV would accept a notarized letter on letterhead from us for this specific purpose.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
For persons on certain types of medications, it can be difficult to find physicians who are willing to manage those medications. So bridging prescriptions are very important and may need to have options to refill, may take longer to get to find the doctor than to get in. Yeah, that's a really good point. Folks need to have those medications and the things need to be in place for them to get them. So they need to have a prescription to get them. They need to have the pieces of paper that they need to have in their hand so the pharmacist will give them their medicine. They need to have a way to pay for it. So all of those things are really important. All right, anything else? Any other questions or comments? So this is our funding slide that we need to show you. Lots of good stuff in there. Thank you. Then we have resources or references.
I shared the desk guide cheat sheet in the chat, and I was wondering if you could just talk about that for a second and how folks can use that.
Sure. So on the cheat sheet or the desk guide, like I said, we developed this by working with SciMed and DCR and some other agencies. And so things are in order for that reason, because we had started working on discharge planning for some folks and come to find out down the road that they either didn't have capacity or they were found to be incompetent. And that meant we had to start all over. So this group, we are suggesting that the first thing that you look at is this person able to make their own decisions? And sometimes it's obvious that they are. You may need to get a type of evaluation to see if a person lacks mental capacity or if they're found to be incompetent. Disability rights really doesn't want to take people's rights away. A healthcare surrogate only makes healthcare decisions, but a legal guardian is like a person being a kid again. Like it's like that person gets to make they can't. The guardian decides if they get their hair cut. They decide if they get their ears pierced. They decide if they take a trip. And so we don't want to put that on someone. And at the same time, sometimes people really need that. To file for a person to get a legal guardian, that comes through circuit court. There's a place on the courtswv.gov to get the legal guardianship petition. The person or agency who files that petition is not volunteering to be the guardian. They're just making the court aware that this person might need some extra help, and then the court will figure it out from there. A lot of times that goes to the Department of Human Services. And so I think, I'm not looking at that right this second, but I think that their centralized intake phone number is on there. You all know that's the number you call for abuse or neglect. But if you call in and ask for a receive services referral with APS, that is going to kind of alert them to the fact that there's a person who needs their assistance in that way. So after you figure out, can this person make their own decisions or not? You're going to figure out what they can and can't do and what level of care they need. And so the next little bit is talking about what can they do, what can they not do, what type of services are going to be the right ones for them. And then there's also some other resources included for things like serving folks who are experiencing homelessness. I believe the comp centers are on there. I believe all the family resource networks are on there. Those are amazing. There's one in it that covers every county, and they just know all the good stuff in every part of the state that will help people who need help. And then also the reentry councils, which again, they're held around the state and they help people with the reentry planning. And there's a lot of brainstorming that goes on amongst those groups as well.
Thank you. This is fabulous to have all of these resources in one location. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah. Any other last questions, comments?
Thank you guys so much for being here. Feel free to reach out if there's something that you heard that you're not sure if we might be able to help with. We really try to help as much as we possibly can. So if you just type into any Google, what's it called, search engine, DRWV, will come up. Feel free to reach out. And thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Very informative. Really appreciate you taking the time to share this with us today.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I put
All
the
right.
evaluation of survey in the chat, so go ahead and do that, and I'll have Mike start working on those CEs for everyone, so you should receive an email in the next couple of days from him. But yeah, thank you again, everyone. Thanks for coming, and thanks, Deborah and Heather. Yeah, appreciate you.
Thanks.
Yep. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and end now, but bye.
Bye.